Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to our OpenNTF September webinar. Today we're going to be talking about a new feature from HCL, Domino Online Meeting Integration, otherwise known as DOMI. To do that, my co-host today is Jesse Gallagher. We gave Graham the day off today, but no pay, of course. And from HCL, we have Paul Withers, Devin Olson, and Rocky Oliver. I'm sure everyone recognizes those names. They've been in the community for many years. At the end, we'll have questions. So speaking of questions, first question everyone asks, is this going to be recorded? Of course, it will be recorded. It's available on YouTube. We also put the links on our OpenNTF.org/webinars page. As well as the ability to download the presentation. So as far as asking questions, in the GoToWebinar interface, there's a questions pane. Ask your questions there. We will not respond to your questions in the questions pane, but we will respond to them verbally at the end. That way we can record the questions and the answers, so people who couldn't make it today can view those. If you have any questions not related to today's webinar topic, please go to the OpenNTF Slack channel. So please keep all your questions today related to what Paul Withers and the team are talking about, the DOMI product. I'd like to give a big shout out to everyone who sponsors OpenNTF, but in particular HCL, who's helps fund these webinars. And they also enable OpenNTF to help the user groups with their user group meetings, whether they're virtual or in person. We've sponsored a number of user group meetings, including some coming up that are going to be on the next slide. I also like to thank Prominent, who donates all our web, IT related services, as well as helps with the administration of the site. So thank you to both those organizations for their long-time support. So again, OpenNTF, hopefully everyone's aware, is a volunteer organization. So if you want to get involved and help, there's all sorts of things you can do. We actually have some open spots on the board, I believe. And so if you're interested in running, let one of us know. If you want to help on a project, help on the website, anything you're interested in, donate a project. We'd love to get your help, support, and participation more than anything. Next webinar is going to be a number of the OpenNTF board members talking about what features they like, the new features that are in Domino 12. So we have right now 3 topics we're going to talk about. Roberto is going to talk about the TOTP, the multi-factor authentication feature. Serdar is going to talk about DOTS, the Domino OSGI task servlet. And then Roberto is going to come back and talk about the Domino or the Notes one-step upgrade. So you can sign up again. Everything related to our webinars is on that one page, OpenNTF.org/webinars. Upcoming events. So again, as I mentioned, OpenNTF does help sponsor these events as a sponsor. CollabSphere is going to be later in October. Coming up first for those folks who are into connections, the Lex Connect, that's virtual. CollabSphere is going to be a virtual event in October. But the first in-person event, many of you might have been to Engage. If you haven't, you might want to make this your first one. It's always a great time. And not only that, I've been to Bruges in Belgium. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And it is an absolutely beautiful town. So it's a great location. So check that out and make your long-term trip plans to get on the road, and hopefully everything will open up a little bit and we'll be able to all get together in person for the first time in probably 2 years. Okay, so let me turn things over to Paul to get started. I'm going to make you the presenter, Paul.
Thanks.
and you should have controls.
Yep.
And we're seeing your screen, Paul.
Excellent. Okay. So thanks for having us to speak again. I'm sure that the attendees are probably sick of my voice because this is the third webinar in a row that I've been on. The good news is that I won't be speaking on the next one. But this one is about DOMI. So Devin, Rocky and I were brought in to work on DOMI at the start of this year. The reason why was that customers had encountered that after upgrading their notes clients, the plugins for Zoom and other meeting services no longer worked in the notes clients. We were given a short timescale for coming up with a delivery, initially 4 weeks. So we set about looking at how we were going to do that. In terms of what we needed to develop, we were given the task of covering Zoom, Teams, Webex, and GoToMeeting as the big four. Obviously, SameTime meetings was out, so it made sense for us to cover that as well. Although, as you'll see, there were differences in how you interact with the SameTime meetings service. So that was a stretch goal. In terms of what we needed to support, it was the Notes Rich Client version 11. You may think, well, why do we not just build Eclipse plugins like had been done before? And it's worth bearing in mind that at the time that the Notes Rich Client came out, a lot of these services only had desktop clients. They didn't have cloud services. They didn't have REST APIs for them. And so it made sense at that time to integrate with the desktop client and require them to have the desktop client installed in order to build those integrations. By the time that we'd come back to it at the beginning of this year, things had moved on significantly. All 4 of those vendors have REST service APIs, and being able to build those and use those allowed us to open up beyond just the Notes Rich client. If you've been at any conferences over the last few years, you'll have heard a lot of sessions on Verse, a lot of sessions on Nomad Web, a lot of sessions on Nomad for mobile. If we focused just on something that would only work in the Rich client, then there's a lot of work that has to then be redone in a completely different way to support those other platforms. The other focus that we had was that it had to be easy to implement and easy to use. If it's not easy to implement, customers won't implement it. If it's not easy to use, end users won't use it. And if we're going to invest time on delivering something like this, then it needs to be used. And so ease of implementation and ease of use were high on our priority list all the way through. So then it came down to, how do we address it? Well, one of the key things that we do in labs is that nothing is on or off the table. It's a case of thinking without the box, and I've done sessions on that before at conferences. It's a case of stepping back and looking at breaking things down into a modular approach and thinking about what can we do to solve those aspects. What are the pieces that we need to put together conceptually at a very high level? What are the technical implementations for each, and how can we integrate them? OAuth was obviously a key element. All 4 of those meeting services authenticate via OAuth, and that in itself had its own challenges for us. We can't open source the mail template, so the installation process had to inject design elements into the mail template, and it had to work light touch. And at this point in time with Domino 11, HTTP calls, we've got the Lotus Script HTTP classes, so it wouldn't make sense from a future-proofing point of view to use ls2j and call HTTP calls via Java. So Lotus Script HTTP was our preferred option for that part of it. Now, I mentioned OAuth, and many people may not be totally familiar with the OAuth flow. I'm happy to say that because at the point where we started on this process and started on this development, I had a bit of knowledge of OAuth. Rocky and Devin had none, and so for that first week,
none whatsoever.
And so that first week, a big part of it was, how does OAuth work? How do we interact with these meeting services? What do the REST service flows look like? So the big part with OAuth is that it requires you to go through a browser. The user clicks a login link, and they are redirected to a browser page that is managed by whichever service you're authenticating in. So the meeting service, so Teams, Webex, Zoom, they manage that website. So we can't get away from that. We've got to use a browser in there. Once they once the authentication is done, their website via the app that we create redirects to a fixed known endpoint, a fixed URL, and it needs to be fixed at that point. So it's physically not, it's not going to be feasible to redirect to a Domino server in each customer. That's just not going to be an option. It's got to redirect to a single URL. There's 2 options then, a notes colon forward slash URL pointing to a local database that goes to the notes client, or an HCL hosted web app. Unfortunately, these services send back a short-lived code as a query string. It's not possible with a local talking to a local notes agent in a local database as opposed to a server-based database to extract that code. So the only option there in the timescales that we wanted was for an HCL hosted app. And once it sends that short-lived code back, the authorization code, then that's combined with a client ID and client secret to get a proper access token. And periodically, if that's not so much the access token, but it also brings back a refresh token. But if that refresh token expires, then there's a request that's needed to send the refresh token back and get an updated refresh token. So that's the OAuth flow, and that's why there needs to be this HCL or hosted web application. We've included that application in the open source product, and I think a number of business partners are looking at hosting that app themselves. Some business partners, I know Roberto, for example, has worked with a customer to implement that web app on site for them. But that's why that needed to be included in the open source code, so that customers that are nervous about using an externally hosted web app that's handling the authentication process, that those customers can then install it on premises. So the other aspect that we've got is the installation database, which pushes the code into the mail template, which then refreshes around to the various mail databases. I mentioned that the OAuth flow requires you to go out to a browser, and that then goes up to the web application, which does the communication with a client ID and client secret to get a token back. It is this app, you can look at the code, it's quite simple. Vertex code. Vertex has their own OAuth libraries, so rather than me trying to build one and get it right first time, it makes a lot of sense to reuse something that other people have already built and tested and got working. So we use those Vertex libraries, and if you look at that code, you'll see all we are doing are just proxying those credentials across and displaying the token. There's no session stored there. It's just a stateless call each time to proxy those details and present the token back on the browser. At the end of the day, I'm a developer. I don't want to have to deal with problems like GDPR. I don't want to store credentials centrally in some database and then need to manage them. I have no interest in doing that. I just want to use this to just pass the credentials and not have to worry about those kind of things. So just to reiterate again and again, we are not storing anything in that app. SameTime works slightly different. It doesn't use OAuth, and it doesn't have a SameTime login page for it. You just pass the username and password, and so that can be done directly between the mail database and SameTime. We don't need to go out to a browser there. That's the architecture that we identified would need to be built for it. So then it came to the division of work. Key here is that we had initially 4 weeks. It pushed it out to about 8 weeks with all of the testing and documentation. But that's a very short period of time where 3 of us are constantly working on all aspects of it. So we need to divide this work up so that we're not stepping on one another's toes, that we're not waiting constantly on one person to do one piece of work in order for us to carry on. We need to split it up, and we need to ensure that, because we're using source control, that it's not going to conflict with one another's code. There were some aspects where we all needed to get involved with. Understanding OAuth, as I said, those first few weeks, running those flows with the various providers' REST services to work out what was different, what was the same, what we needed to code, and to have REST services via Postman that we could test to cross-reference with the output from the code that we wrote. I'd done a bit with Lotus Script HTTP requests, still not a huge amount, but all 3 of us had to work on getting to understand that, and also getting to understand the Voltimex Lotus Script toolkit, which we used. There was constant communication. I mean, we were talking multiple times each day there were a lot of times where we'd all jump on a call and help unblock one of us on the work that we were doing.
I mean, it was essentially pair programming, really.
Yes, yeah, and particularly when you've got this short time scale, constant communication is absolutely vital. There's not time to sit and wait around and wallow in your own self-pity because you can't get something working. You have to put aside that ego and ask for help. And redundancy. We didn't want one person to be the only person who knew about how something worked, so that once it became open sourced, if there was a problem with any area, there were at least two of us who would be able to look at and solve that problem. We didn't want to be in the situation where someone could be run over by a bus and everything fail. But then there was separate split up of work. So I dealt with the web app, project management, just keeping everyone on track and working with people outside of our team to keep them aware of where we were going, and very much the documentation. Rocky worked on the installation database, Zoom proof of concept, and SameTime, and Devin worked on the core Lotus script code, incorporating any third-party libraries and some of those other implementations. But obviously then Rocky picked up the core work that Devin had done and refactored his to integrate it. There was a lot of refactoring, and that's another key aspect.
Well, there was a lot of, there was a lot of, like, everybody, we all would hand a little bit to each person over and over again. So like Rocky would come up with an idea and he'd hand it to me and I would take it and run with it. And I'd come up with an idea and I'd hand it with him and he'd take it and run with it. Or you'd take something and run with it from one of us. Or, I mean, it was all back and forth. We were all constantly sharing ideas back and forth and then expanding upon everything and growing everything. It was a really cool process. Sorry to interrupt you there. And also Paul had a really hard time because he was, trying to herd me and Rocky. And those of you who know us, that's not an easy task.
Especially when my ADHD is in overdrive.
Sorry for the interruption there.
No, not at all. So also it's worth bearing in mind when you've got a time-boxed task like this, then you need to be conscious of the phases of development. So that first, we were on weekly sprints, so 1 week sprints, show something at the end. Jason is a big advocate of code, not PowerPoints. So it was, that first week was a lot of research. I think the demos at the end of it were probably via Postman with the APIs, but it was breaking down what are those functional steps, what are the options for each, and where do we go next. Then it came into POCs, building examples for some of the parts, and there was a lot of hard coding in there, which is fine at that POC stage. But it gave us something to demonstrate to product management of here's our ideas for it, to get their buy-in. Then it was into the heavy building phase of it, breaking out those modules and coding lots and lots of Lotus script, constantly coming back and improving the quality. Then if you're not refactoring code, you're not improving the code. And so there was a good amount of refactoring there and generalizing stuff out into reusable components, which was another key focus for us. We've delivered something, and we wanted to deliver something that wasn't just DOMI. It could be for much more. And so, as Rocky will come back to later, the installation database that you've got can be done for more than just injecting DOMI into a mail template. The web app that we created is it can be easily extended for any OAuth service. So there's more than just the initial target. And then the final bit, a lot of polishing. So on to demos, and we're going to go to Devin first of all for some intro on the web app and the installation and using Teams. And we see your screen, Devin. Can't hear you though.
Mute.
Okay, so here's my screen. I'm hoping you all see it, and yeah, Paul said he could see it, so I'm really happy. First off, Paul talked about it being open source and where we have it. So this is where you go to get it. GitHub.com, HCL Tech Software, Domino Online Meeting Integration. So you can go pick it up right now. So before anybody asks where can I get it or when, you can get it now. It's up there, it's available. This is the GitHub site. Here's the documentation site for it. It's all there. The web app. So we talked about the web app. It's here, and it is so you can actually see the source code that we are using for the real HCL Labs web app, which is I can't remember the real official URL at the moment. I'm drawing a blank, so I'll use the DOMI one. So here we go. Web app, yay. It's running. It's a Vertex application. It's very simple. It's a Docker app, very simple to administer. Configuration is deliriously, again, simple. Broke my pipe.
And the URL is integration-auth-token.hcltechsw.com.
Thank you. That's how the web app is configured. We just simply include the actual host name and the client ID, client secret. This is all of the stuff that we talked about, or that Paul kind of mentioned as far as the OAuth. So for all of the supported apps, there's a Webex, GoToMeeting, Teams, and Zoom at the moment. We have a client ID and a client secret. These, of course, for the demo are invalid because I'm not going to share our client IDs and client secrets with the world. And in fact, I don't even know them because I'm a developer and not a administrator, so I shouldn't have access to them. But if you guys decide to host your own, you can. You don't need to. But if you really feel that you must, you can pull the code down, see how it works, and host your own and set it up. You will have to get your own client IDs and client secrets. This information is stored in the configuration for the web app only, and then when you authenticate, none of that information is carried, none of that information is passed back down to the browser or to your user, to your notes client. It's proper, clean, real OAuth 2 authentication. So, well, how do I put it in? It's pretty simple. When you download it and you install it in your site, you'll get this NSF. And I've got it in Designer here, pretty simple. There's the script libraries. Everything in here is standard notes design elements. We have a subform, we've got some action buttons, we've got some agents, we've got some script libraries. There's no crazy magic or hidden design or anything like that. You can see the source for everything. You can modify it if you choose to do so. It's all there. Here's a mail file that I have that is currently set up on the 1101 template. And so there's some email from me, yay, no big deal. We require 1101 fix pack 3. And the reason we require 1101 fix pack 3 is we discovered there was a bit of an issue with the notes HTTP request object, in that it wasn't really entirely working the way we would want it. It was not always returning the correct HTTP response codes. And so because of that, we were getting some errors and we were having some problem with development and putting this together. And so Rocky, being the genius developer that he is, wrote this kick-ass agent. No, seriously, it's awesome. And it's called, where'd it go? Test HTTP response code. And all this agent does is it uses the node's HTTP request object to test a response code and to verify that it's going to return the correct response. So if I come in here and I go to the main area and I choose tool actions and I test that HTTP response code and I put in a response code like 200, it tests it out across everything and will come back and give me the real responses, again, opposed to put a patch and delete. And I can put in any code I want. And again, I can put in any documented HTTP response code and it'll retest it and come back. And this tool allowed us to prove to product development that there was in fact a problem with the node's HTTP request object. We handed over the wall to product development. They got on the ball, and 1101 fix pack 3 contains a fix for that object. That's why we require this. So now everything works, and it was a wonderful case of being able to prove the problem, document the problem, and get the problem fixed almost immediately. So here's the installer, and how do I install it? Well, it's pretty easy. Normally, you would install it in your mail template, and then push the template up to the particular server and let Designer run overnight, and magically, you know, everybody's mail file is magically updated because we all know how Designer works. I'm going to do this to my mail file directly instead. So you click the install DOMI button and you go find the file you want to install it to. And I have this in a non-standard location because it's a non-replica copy. So I'm going to go here and there's my mail file. I'm going to hit open and it's going to magically install. Boom, done. It's pretty much that simple. That's all there is to it. And what it's done is it's gone out and it's copied the appropriate necessary script libraries into my mail file. It has added the correct subform into my mail file, and then it has used some magic DXL code, again, all written in LoRaScript, and it has gone to that mail file and it has injected into it a subform in the main. Yeah, so it is now injected the subform into the appointment calendar entry form.
Right, appointment.
And right here. That subform has now been injected via DXL into that appointment form. So now I have the ability to use DOMI in this mail file. It has also added this really cool view for online meeting credentials. And from in there, I created a meeting credential document. In this case, I'm going to choose Teams. This meeting credential document will contain my personalized refresh token and my personalized auth token that are used and handed up in order to create a meeting. It's really simple. And I use this nice get OAuth token button, which is going to launch a web browser. It's going to attempt to authenticate with Teams. Teams is, of course, going to ask me for my credentials to authenticate. And this is a real-time demo, so it's going to run ridiculously slow. There we go. So I'm going to sign in. Hey, everybody recognizes that name. Yay, signing in. And I'm going to enter the password. And because we use third-party authenticators, authenticator apps, I'm going to have to authenticate this on my phone. Give me just a second. or it's not going to work and embarrass me terribly. Okay, it's just kind of sitting here. That's really embarrassing, but it's just sitting there. I want to be patient, but come on, Microsoft. The server's up, right? Yeah, the server's up. All right, well, this looks like a bandwidth issue or some other issue. And with all those files across two desktops, there's got to be something incriminating there. Thanks for that comment, Jesse. I'm having a panic moment. I don't know why it's not connecting. It should just work.
Is it worth just clicking that button again and trying a new browser window?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Try
Yeah, as I say, close the browser, start over.
Yeah. There we go. Approve sign in. I'm approving sign in on my authenticator. Approve. Touch ID. Touch ID. Approve. Okay, we got a little farther there. Normally it never takes this long. Yeah, stay signed in. Come on. It's killing me. It's embarrassing. It's a public demo. There we go. Okay, so now what I have now done is I now have this refresh token. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy it using the real simply copy button. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paste it. And as soon as I paste it, what's going to happen is code in here, Lotus script code in here is going to attempt to connect to Teams. And it's going to pass it that refresh token, and it's going to ask for an authentication token. And when it gets a valid authentication token back, it's going to tell me that my authentication token is valid, and I may proceed. So here we go. I'm going to click paste, and the magic code is going to run. My OAuth token is in fact valid. I can hit OK. I'm now here. I'll have my Teams thing, and if I open it up again, you'll see that I now have there's the authorization. So life is good. I'm pretty happy. Let me go here. Let's go here. Let's go to calendar. Let me create a meeting for tomorrow. Teams test. I'm going to add Paul. Lucky. And I want it for 7 a.m. on Friday. No, I'm a masochist. I'm going to make it for 5 a.m. on Friday, 5:15 a.m. tomorrow. And I'm going to say, look at this. I have this nice new button up here, schedule online meeting, and it says Teams. If I had credentials for other services, I have the other services, but I'll just use that, just Teams. And code is running and it's processing, and in the background it's magically reaching out to Teams, and oh look, it's created a Teams meeting. So right there, there's the attendee link. That's a real Teams meeting. And I can save and send my invitations, just that simple. And if I were to come here and paste that in, it would open up that Teams meeting because Teams doesn't really care when the meeting is, as long as it's a valid URL. So here's my Teams test, and I'm like, nah, that's too early. So you do have to do this. If I decide to change the meeting to like 8 a.m. instead, you do have to press the update button in this version. So we don't do any code based on voice save or exit value change, but it's going to go out in Teams. If you watch closely, pitch that URL, you see the URL changed, and so yeah, there's the meeting. I'm going to send a reschedule notice. Meeting changed. And that's pretty simple. And that's, I think that was kind of it for my portion of the demo. I do want to show one thing real quick, and that is.
I think also the thing to say there is that Teams itself does not have the ability to update a Teams meeting. what Teams has is just the option to create a meeting or delete a meeting. We've added in the ability to update a meeting there. The other thing to bear in mind is that it does change the URL. And the way a meeting notice is accepted in Notes, it doesn't update the online meeting location. That's fixed in 12.01. So if you're still using 11.01 FixPax 3 or 12, then the recommendation is not to update the Teams meeting, because the Notes people that you send it to won't get the updated URL in their meeting. Works fine for other meeting services, but Teams doesn't care about when the meeting is anyway. So really, there's not much point in changing that URL.
Right. So yeah, that's a valid point. And the reason that we added the ability to edit a Teams meeting is we decided, and I think wisely, that the UI for every single meeting should feel the same for the users out there. So the way that you schedule a Teams meeting versus the way that you schedule a GoToMeeting or a Webex or any of them, with a small exception of SameTime, Rocky will talk about that in just a second, the user experience is identical. And we wanted that to be, it was very important to us that that felt the same, because we didn't, because you manage your meetings within Notes, not within those other things. So we wanted it to be a Notesy experience. That's kind of what we did. So there's the meeting. I can join the meeting now, but I really don't want to join a meeting from within a GoToMeeting, and even with good bandwidth, it's just a pain. So the one thing that I wanted to show you really quick here was that's not the production URL. It normally would be, but I changed it for this demo so that I could use my demo URL. The one that's actually in there in reality is the one that Paul referenced earlier. And at that, I'm going to stop demoing, and I'm going to let Rocky demo, because he's got some stuff he needs to show quickly. So Rock, I'm going to stop sharing and turning over to you, brother.
Cool. All right. So let's see. What do we want to talk about first? Hold on. I need to do show my screen. So let me click a screen to show. We're going to scroll.
Do you want to quickly show Zoom, just to give a parallel of
sure.
the
Can you guys see the screen yet?
Meeting services?
Yep.
I can see your screen.
Okay. Yay. Okay. I love it when things work. By the way, I want to apologize ahead of time. They all of a sudden decided to trim the trees right outside of my apartment during this call. So if you hear trees in the back, power tools in the background, that's what's going on. And I apologize in advance. All right. So you saw how Teams works when you schedule a meeting. And as Spanky mentioned, we went for a consistent UI for all of them. So I can show you how Zoom works. And then I'll show you SameTime, and then I'm going to talk about the installer a little bit. So if we look over here real quick, just in my calendar entry, or my my online meeting credentials. Right now I've got SameTime and Zoom created, credentials for both of those. And if so, when I go into create a new calendar entry, this will be for OpenNTF Zoom. I can say, let's see, required. We'll add in, actually, I'll just set it to, I think it should come up, but I just say Paul. Yeah, we'll just put Paul in there for now. Actually, I'm going to do it. What's your HCL? It's paulstephen.withers, right? paulstephen.withers. Yeah, that one. All right, so we'll just invite Paul for now. And I'll change the time a little bit. And so now if I go up here to schedule a meeting, see, I only have the two, Zoom and SameTime. I'll explain in a minute. SameTime's a little different when we get to it. The SameTime thing will only show if you configure that you have SameTime in your environment, because while the other 4 online services we support are cloud-based, SameTime is enterprise-based. Every enterprise, their SameTime installation is going to be different. So it won't show up. SameTime will not be an option unless, even when you're creating a credential, unless your enterprise SameTime server's been configured and set up in DOMI, and I'll cover that in a minute. But anyways, let's do a Zoom meeting. So created the Zoom meeting. Basically, it looks like what you have seen before and what Spanky showed. You can see we have our Zoom URL. Let me go to Zoom. I meant to do this. I meant to have this already up, but I didn't. Give me a second. Let's see. Zoom. Which one? Let's do just Zoom. I don't know. We'll try this one. And if I go to regular Zoom, sign. Give me a second. Sorry. Why isn't? There we go. Okay, I'm signed in. So I should be able to go to regular Zoom and go to, where's the my meetings? I'm panicking.
Just change the URL to zoom.us.
Okay. Zoom.us. All right. And I sign in again. And meetings, there's what I'm looking for. So you can see the meeting I just created, 1 to 2, OpenNTF Zoom. Now, if I go back into notes, I can make a change. Let's say we'll change it to Zoom meeting demo, and we'll change the time to say 3:30. I can click update Zoom meeting. It updates it. The URL doesn't change because Zoom does support changing times and dates and things like that. If I do a refresh on it, you'll notice the time changed and it changed the title. So this is a neat integration that we have that, like, if you use Zoom, the Zoom plugin in Outlook, once you create a meeting in Outlook, there is no connection between the calendar entry and the meeting you've created. If you delete or change your calendar entry, there's no way to update the corresponding Zoom meeting. We have a feature, our value add. We actually give you the ability to do that. So since now I can update meetings. Same thing goes for delete. I can delete my Zoom meeting and it'll nuke it, clears this out, makes it back where I can schedule meetings again. And if I go back into Zoom and do a refresh, you'll see the meeting's gone. So nice integration with Zoom for creation, update, and deletion of meetings. And this works across all of the online services we support. So even though we're just showing you Team and Zooms, it also works in GoToMeeting and Webex and even SameTime. So that's how we do Zoom. Let's talk about SameTime real quick. SameTime's a little different animal in a couple of ways. First off, it does not support the OAuth dance that we're used to. It uses a combination of JWT and nonces for doing communication back and forth with the server via the API. So the dance you do that we normally do for credentials is slightly different for SameTime, and I'll show you that. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and I'll nuke my SameTime credentials. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to go and say, uh-oh, why is that not showing up? Looks like okay, so this is a good example. Okay, this is good because now we can show how to fix this. So notice SameTime's not showing up. What?
It's not because it's cached. I bet it's because URL is it?
Right, I was going to say it's probably the URL because I've updated my install a bunch of times. So this will be a good opportunity to show how you do this. The URL, the way that the system knows that you have SameTime is that it uses, oh, I don't have it in here. Great. Do you remember the URL? Somebody give me the URL for us. MyHCL software, something like that.
Oh man, I can't remember.
And of course, I shouldn't have nuked my
You deleted
credentials.
it.
I know.
Oh, what was it?
It's the SameTime software one. So hold on. I'm sorry, guys. I had this.
The sandbox one.
Yeah, the sandbox one. It's like
the sandbox is, hold on a second.
Sandbox dot, no. Was it my? Oh, come on, Rocky. HCL software.
Meetings.myhclsandbox.com.
There it is. Yay! Thank you. That one. That's what I want. So I will copy that, and I will come back over. And the way that you
Sorry,
add
not
it
that
is
one.
what?
Meetings. You copied the live server. It's meetings.myhclsandbox.com.
Oh, okay. Meetings. Ah, son of a biscuit. Okay. Meetings. Dot. There it is. This one. But I don't want the meeting API. I only want this part. Okay. And get rid of this. All right. So now I can go back here. The way that you add it in there is I'm going to do this into my Bell file. You go into the script library for that's called DOMI constants, which is right here. And there's a special place right here. And this is also in the installer landing page, and I'll show you that in a second. But basically, you take your URL to your enterprise SameTime server, and you put it in right here into the into this constant and save it.
It's important that you remove the trailing slash, as you saw Rocky just
yeah,
pasted in.
you
and
can
cut
remove
off.
it. I have code now in there that actually will remove it anyway, but I prefer you to remove it. But yeah, it fixes it. And then we go back over here. I need to close this, and then I'll create a new one. And it detects the fact that that URL's there, and now SameTime's available. Yay! Okay, now I also need to change, because this is the sandbox, it doesn't use my standard email, so I need to change my email. So I put that in there, and now I'm going to get my SameTime token. And if you'll notice, the first thing it's going to do is prompt me for my password, and I'm trying to remember what my password is. I think I know what it is. It should be that. This is the only time you have to enter this. Your password is not stored anywhere in the system. It's never written down. But for the first time, when you do an authentication with the SameTime server, you have to pass it the email and password as a part of the package that gets sent over. So I capture it here, send it directly to the SameTime server, and get my tokens back, and it's never stored anywhere. So I say, okay, and I got my access token successfully retrieved. Notice I didn't have to go out to the OAuth server and copy the credentials like you did before. And I can save and close it. Now I have SameTime credentials. So I can go to the calendar, and I can create another thing, and I'll set this one, say SameTime meeting. And then I'll set this equal to Paul Withers, and I'll set it to 5. And then I'll hit schedule online meeting. Now, SameTime is weird in a couple other ways. First off, it uses the subject of your meeting as the basically identifier for the meeting on the SameTime server. It doesn't use like a special ID. It doesn't generate a token or anything like that. The bad part is that there are a bunch of symbols that it doesn't allow, a bunch of characters that it doesn't recognize. So a part of my code will go through and strip out all of the characters not allowed. It will also replace all spaces with underscores, basically turning the title into a valid URL bit. And then the last thing I do, because you could have multiple meetings with the same name, right, with the same subject. So I go ahead and tag on a unique key at the end of it so that each meeting will be a separate and different meeting from the other ones. Otherwise, if you try to do 2 meetings with the same name, it'll tell you that meeting already exists, and it doesn't work the same way. So these are a couple of things that you'll notice that's different here. And if I go over to here and I refresh, you'll notice now that there's my SameTime meeting that I just created. The other thing you'll notice about SameTime meetings is they don't really track times. These are more like rooms than they are meeting spaces that have a designated date and time. So even though we've got date and time numbers in the calendar entry, that doesn't translate over to the server. It doesn't really get sent or needed. but we still have to allow for updates, because what if I change this title? So if I change this to SameTime Meeting Demo, then, and I hit update, then it will go ahead and update the URL and the corresponding meeting under the hood. So the title change is reflected. Same thing applies for deleting a SameTime meeting. It works just like you would expect. Nukes the meeting, come back over to SameTime, refresh, meeting's gone. So that's the integration with SameTime. Like I said, slightly different than the rest of the services, but we try to give a UI that's similar or as common as possible to the other services, so that it feels there's a consistent feeling to it for your end user. All right, so now that we've talked about SameTime and giving you examples of how these work, and the other services, GoToMeeting and Webex, work just like we've shown for Teams and Zoom and SameTime, so we won't do those because they're boring, same thing over and over. Let's talk about a little bit more about in depth into the installation of this service. So when we were designing DOMI, you know, as we all know, the mail file is a very dangerous place to be mucking around. And so when we were integrating DOMI with the mail template, we knew that we wanted to be as minimally invasive as possible and be more additive than changing things, than modifying things. So all our code is self-contained. I knew I needed to move all that code over into the template. I also needed to manage when changes were made, tracking that if somebody does an update to it, also provide a way to remove it. So I needed everything kind of self-contained. However, there is one spot, and Spanky showed this earlier, that I did need to touch a design, and that was with the appointment form or the calendar entry. And that was, so basically we put all of these action buttons you see for this up here, those are all self-contained in a subform, along with a bunch of metadata fields that are used internally for us to track and keep up with stuff about the meeting. And so I knew that I could, if you ever look at the design of the calendar entry form in the mail file, it's all based off subforms. So the calendar
You're
entry.
also gonna cry.
Huh?
I was being snarky.
Yeah.
I said,
so
if
this
you
is
look
what
at
it
the
looks
calendar
like.
entry, you're gonna cry.
Yeah, without this thing. Now, all the subforms that get tagged into this, which I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but I mean, there's a bunch of subforms that it uses based on what version you're running. So rather than trying to integrate with this and really make it messy and gorpy, I added it at the upper level as an additional subform because I knew it would work, right? Because I'm only adding action buttons, so they'll just show up at the top on the action bar at the end of the existing ones. Nice integration. So the way that I do this is basically after we copy all the elements over, I get a handle to the calendar entry, I make a backup copy of it, I then get the DXL for that calendar entry in a stream, in a text stream. I find the end of the existing code in the calendar entry design, and then I stick in my DXL that references my subform and save it and close it. That's how it's integrated. And then the reverse process will do the same thing, except it'll take it out. It'll go find it, remove it, and put the calendar entry back to the way it was. So that's how the install works from a kind of talking level. Now, let's talk about a little bit more details of how the installer was created. When I designed the installer, I wanted it to be something that was functional, obviously, but was also reusable. They could be used for really any feature. And I'm probably going to do kind of a more genericized feature installer version of this install database that I made. I don't know, maybe I'll give it away at Engage or something. But basically, what this thing will allow you to do is, you know, there's a lot of organizations that have custom integrations into their mail template. This thing would allow you to manage that. So as new versions of mail comes out, or the server comes out in the mail template, you could have your features self-contained in one of these feature installer databases, and be able to click a button and have it re-inject all of your changes back into the new template. That was my thinking. So how does it work? If we go into the database itself, basically what I do is I have an agent that will crawl this database itself, the installer database itself, and will create a design element profile for every design element in the database, which is what you're seeing here. The design element profile is very simple. It basically tracks the name, its type, any aliases it has, when it was last modified, its UNID, and I have a tag on it that tells me if it's a part of the feature set that I'm wanting to install, because this database contains design elements that are part of itself that provide the installation functionality, and then also the features design elements. So I have to have a way to tag or to differentiate those two, so when the installer runs, it knows which elements it needs to get a handle to move over into the target database. And so I do that by using a little feature tag, which you just showed. So if you'll notice, these elements under the node tag are the ones that are part of the core installer itself, and then everything under yes is a part of the feature. So all of these are feature set elements. So the way that the installer code actually works is I crawl all of these design element profiles with the yes tag. I get a handle to that design element as a document or as a note based on this UNID that I've captured, and then I move it over. So I get a handle of the thing, copy it to the database. Before I copy it, I make sure that there's not one already there. And if there is, I remove it and then put mine in. And I check for it by name, not by UNID. Now, let's talk about UNIDs for a second. There's a weird thing in that certain elements, namely agents and script libraries, get cached. Their design notes and stuff get cached in the client when they're accessed. This causes a problem when if I go, let's say I hit the install button and it moves everything over, and then I make a change in like a script library, and I want to hit the installer again to update that in my corresponding template. What it'll do is tell me that this element's been modified since you last edited it, because it's a cached element, it doesn't keep up with the fact that it's been changed. So it won't let you just copy it over on top of the old one. In order for me to be able to do that, I have to basically change the UNID, because to that means it's a different element. So there's code under the hood that manages all of this that will basically change the UNIDs on the fly to get them moved over and update these profiles and everything else and keep it synced for you in the background so that the elements can be updated cleanly into the target database. And we have agents too that, like, if that gets out of sync or something, you get a weird element about that you can't find a universal ID, or that the weird thing about it's been edited and you can't change it. There are agents that allow you to generate the design element profiles, resync the design element profiles, which is resyncing, getting the UNIDs and the profiles synced back together, and so on. So there's ways to manage this, and a part of the install process, and you saw how fast it was anyway, is refreshing all of these UNIDs on script libraries and agents before they're moved over. So it takes care of that for you behind the scenes, and you don't have to manage it at all if it's working right. And so far it's been working pretty well. So that's how this whole thing works. The other thing I wanted to show real quick is, let me close this part real quick, sorry. All right, this is when you first open it, we have a landing page that opens up. And it has instructions about installing it, warnings about, the versions and all that we talked about before. It also tells you how to put in SameTime meetings, which you saw me do earlier. So there's instructions on how to accomplish, where to go, which is the DOMI constants BE, and what to add into it. So basically what you would do is do this before you install it into the target database. You would do this in your DOMI database design, or the DOMI constants BE there, and then when you hit the button, it'll update the template, and that code will already, this will already be there for you. You'll also notice that there's an uninstall DOMI button, and this basically reverses the install. It goes and removes all the elements like we talked about earlier and updates the appointment form back to its pristine condition before I sullied it with my DOMI code. So I think that's about it on my end. Was there anything else I needed to cover, guys?
No, I just want to reiterate one of your points. You talked about using this DOMI installer to install and manage a mail template, meaning the base design of this. And I want to reiterate to everybody else, you could use this architecture that's open source that Rocky's provided for us to manage any type of design element management system that you choose. You don't have to use it just for a mail template. You can use it for any type of thing you have. So
target any database.
It's a very impressive bit of wizardry that he's put together. I'm really proud of my buddy. So
thank you. I can show you real quick since we got a little time. The installer agent is pretty simple. Basically, it does what we talked about.
We don't have a whole lot of time. We have other stuff. So.
Oh, we do have other stuff to do? Okay.
Yeah, Paul has other stuff to talk about.
Anyways, it's documented. I have it pretty commented out if you want to look through it. But this first part does the installer, and this is the thing that adds the subform in. So if you want to see how that works, all this code's there. Open, load a script. Okay, I will stop sharing.
Great, thanks.
And obviously, if anybody has questions, feel free to ping me.
Yep. So we've seen quite a lot there. We've got the Docker image for OAuth Web, for the OAuth Web app, the installation database, which is reusable. We've got the online meeting provider configurations, full CRUD of the meetings, and it's extensible for other meeting services as well. And as you can see, that's just a diagram of the interactions between the script libraries. There's a lot of code there. And we've got the online documentation as well, so that you can drill through. And that doesn't just cover installation and use, it also walks through the code as well. The OAuth app that we set up for Webex is now up on their app hub. We had to go through a very rigorous approval process, both for Webex and for Zoom, because it's also on the Zoom marketplace as well. And
the approval process took longer. It took longer for them to approve us than it took us to write this.
Yep.
It was crazy.
But we got some very good feedback on the job that we did with it. And of course, it's coming in 12.01. Those of you who are running the 12.01 beta will have seen it already incorporated into the mail template. It's not just been a case of copying and pasting the code across, although very little of the code has actually been changed. But we've also got, but the team have also put in language support. It's using profile documents instead of those configuration documents and a view. You can manage those profiles from the calendar entry, so there's no need to go into another view. It's integrated into the form UI events, so updates automatically happen, and there's a lovely seamless UI for it as well.
You want me to demo that?
I don't think we really have time this time. Yep.
All right. Too bad, because it's way cool.
Yes. Yeah, we've got a lot of questions. And although we were on hand to walk people through all of it, there's none of our work in there. It's this team of people who have been involved in project managing and integrating and testing and all of it. So these are the people that you need to give credit to for what's in the core templates rather than us three. So at the time that 12.01 goes gold, the open source version will still be available for 11.01 Fixpack 3 and 12.00. strongly recommended that you upgrade. We're not expecting to be adding any enhancements into the open source version because they wouldn't then go back into the core. We will be reviewing the issues, and the developers who've been involved in putting it into the core are also looking at those issues and picking them up and creating SPRs where required for them. So there's a group of us dealing with those issues, but the repository itself will pretty much be archived. That's one of the big reasons why we've never put this onto the OpenNTF website. We're not intending for the HCL open source GitHub to step on the toes of OpenNTF. It covers all of HCL software beyond just Domino and connections. So it's not right for all of that stuff to be on OpenNTF. But equally, it's covering things like documentation, and it doesn't make sense for documentation to be available just as a download from OpenNTF's website. It makes much more sense for that to be a live, living content on the HCL GitHub that you can interact with, that you can create pull requests against to fix. There will be projects that will go on to OpenNTF, but there will also be projects that will just stay on our GitHub. For support for 11.01, Fixpack 3 and 12, that will still be through GitHub. Once you're on 12.01 and above, then the support will be via the usual HCL channels. And what you see in 12.01 is not going to be the end of the development for it. The OAuth web app will still be relevant for people that are wanting to host or wanting to do OAuth from the Notes client for their other applications. So if you want to authenticate to GitHub, for example, then you could use that OAuth app for that as well. So we learned a hell of a lot with it. We were told that a lot of some of the aspects here were impossible, but we just got on and did it anyway. And there were a lot of places where we failed, that just gave us an opportunity to learn. You cannot over communicate on a project this size. You need to be constantly talking. And if you hit something that you think is a bug, I would strongly recommend, even for your support issues with HCL, create small standalone tests, because then it's very easy to split out what is a problem with your code versus a particular API. And that test that Devin showed, we use that to pick up a problem with one of the 12 betas. We've used it to pick up problems with proxy servers and multi-user installs, and that's why it's in the installation database, so it can be reused to prove what's the problem with DOMI and what's the problem with the core.
Yeah, we found differences in various language versions and differences between Mac and Windows versions. So yeah, those small tests work. They are invaluable.
Yeah, and we could not have delivered this in the timescales that we did without reusing existing code. There's no shame in picking up stuff that you've done before or that other people have done and reusing it. And in a short timescale, don't be afraid to ask for help, but also take the time to refactor and improve it. But you need to know when to stop. And as we've shown with the reusability aspects of it, focus on the goals by all means, but don't just focus on the goals, think bigger as well.
Yep. Always try and make it better, but at a certain point, you still have to ship. So
Yep.
It's like, oh, it's not perfect yet. I don't care. Does it work? Is it clean? Yes, but it's not perfect. Doesn't matter. We're shipping.
Yeah. So Howard, do you want to lead us through the questions? I'll just pick up one of the questions there. Verse, there is a plan for it to go into Verse. Verse has its own quirks, and although we wanted to cover Verse here, it just had to be out of scope because of the depth of integration and the handling the profiles was not going to be easy with how Verse works at the moment. So it was left out of scope, out of what we delivered, but there is a definite appreciation from HCL that it needs to go into Verse as well.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Are you
I would
the
love
team
to try
ready
and
for
answer
some?
some questions, but I don't see any of them.
Well, Devin, we're gonna tell you the question.
Oh,
that's
oh,
what
okay.
Jesse
So
and I
no,
do. We've been waiting for
awesome.
this moment.
So no time
Yeah,
to
you
prep.
can just sit back.
All right,
Yeah.
here we go. Bring them on.
All right. So, Paul, you did answer about the Verse questions. There were a couple on that. What about Google Meetings? Is that planned in the future?
I'll take that one.
I don't think there's any plan to expand the meeting services that are provided there. The code in 12.01 will still be open source. So there's nothing stopping you adding that. But if you want that meeting service in the core as well, then raise that as an idea on the AHA site.
Yep. Raise it as an idea on the AHA site, but if you can't wait, as Paul said, the code the code's very complex. There's a lot of code, but it's written in a modular format, and it's very easy to extend. If you go through it and take a look at some of the constants libraries and some of the supporting libraries we have in there, what it takes to add another service fully and have it fully function, as long as it's a proper OAuth 2 service and not a weird one like SameTime, but a standard one like the GoToMeetings one, or excuse me, like the Google service. Realistically, I'm willing to guess 250 to 300 lines of code total is all it's going to take. And in fact, realistically, probably a lot less, probably less than 20.
A lot less.
Yeah. Well, that's if you got to do domestic API stuff. But
we've documented how it all works too. So
right. If it follows the standard REST or the standard API models that all the others follow, realistically, 20 lines at most. It's not hard to extend.
Yep.
Okay, great. Then Daniel brought up a point, and I don't know if this is the bug you saw in your test agent, but the Lotus script HTTP requests might break in a multi-user environment. Is that the bug you said that you found, and it's getting?
Yeah,
that's actually a different one, but that has been fixed. I think for 12.01.
yeah,
there was an SPR raised for that. The core team picked that up.
I just got confirmation. I just got confirmation from Bruce. He's listening. Yes, 12.01. That problem's fixed.
And the problem we have with HTTP requests.
Awesome.
The problem we had with HTTP requests was that there's 5 different basic response type or call types to HTTP requests, and the responses that the original libcurl wrapper that we have was giving back were inconsistent. A couple of them only returned 200, and a couple of them didn't return a code at all. They just weren't aware of that because nobody had used it before now, I guess, that much. So we pointed that out. They responded quickly, got it fixed, and that's what that little agent did that we showed earlier. It helped them be able to quickly identify and test and roll out a fix for the HTTP request class pretty quickly.
Yeah, they got it out in just a couple of weeks. I mean, they really rocked it. Okay, so.
All right, great. Jesse, you have a question lined up?
Sure. So the next one was, will this work with the Mail 12, so presumably like 12.0, not 01 template design?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
The open source version that we just demoed will work with anything before 12.01, between FixPack 3, 11, FixPack 3, and 12, and then 12.01 will be integrated.
Okay, great. Renato wanted to know, can you create the calendar entry in the calendars of Teams?
The calendars of Teams are actually pointing to your personal Outlook calendar. So yeah, as Devin says, no. There's no integration from those services back into the calendar entry, because those services don't allow you to store anything there that will tell them where to go to update your calendar entry. You don't store in there your Domino server ID locations, and you certainly don't store their credentials for an external service to be able to access your mail file. So there's no communication the other way.
However, just as a side note,
it's a completely different set of, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you put somebody who is using Outlook, like when you are doing your calendar entry and you do an online meeting and you send the invitations out, when it gets there just as an end user, if I receive a calendar entry from you that has an online meeting, it will integrate into your calendar just like anybody else sending it. So you'll see it, you'll have your links, and everything will work just fine in Outlook for a received calendar entry from the system. Just as a side.
But as far as the REST API goes, as Paul kind of hinted at, and this is something I banged my head against the wall with for days and screamed and ranted and threw things, because Microsoft's API for Teams is completely disassociated from their API for your calendar. So it can't be done because Microsoft won't allow us to do it. They're two separate APIs. It's just maddening. So even if we decided we wanted to, which we don't, because we're managing the calendars from within nodes, it can't be done unless Microsoft changes the API. So little point of frustration.
Okay, thanks. Next question, what's the effect of DOMI and the credentials when you have calendar delegation?
So the credentials are secured with an authors field that has the author of the online meeting credential and the meeting and the mailbox owner. So if you've got, so our working assumption was that if you've got delegation to a PA, for example, then the PA would be also setting up the credential document as well as creating the calendar entries. There's nothing stopping you, as I say, because they're secured with reader access, because they're secured with that reader access. If you've got a team mailbox, for example, each individual could set up their own versions of the meeting credentials, and it would work in that same way. I'm not sure what the approach going forward is around handling delegation, but I know that's on the roadmap to improve what we've done.
I recall chatting with Bruce about it some time ago, and I don't think it's in 12.01, but I think they have that planned for a later release. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, post 12.01. So
yeah, at the end of the day here, we didn't know how delegation works out in the field. We needed to get it out, so we took this approach. And if it doesn't cover the needs, then maybe another option would be to add into that readers field a role and give that role to both the PA and the owner, handle it that way.
Yeah.
It's open access, open design, so see what works.
Okay, moving on. Jesse, do you have a question lined up?
Yeah, so if a meeting is rescheduled using the Webex web client, how is the notes calendar entry updated rescheduled?
Yeah, it's not.
it is not.
Yeah, same.
It's just not.
Same for Zoom as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no return channel communication. There's no way right now for any of the service providers to reach out and touch our entry, our stuff, or more point, your stuff. They can't touch your mail client. They can't touch your notes client. They don't know how to touch your server. They don't have that information. So there's no way for them to get the information back to you.
Yeah, it's a one way.
Right. So the idea then is manage those meeting times and dates from within your notes client, because your notes client will handle updating the meeting services. So, if you make a meeting change within notes and then update it, or in 12.01, you don't even have to press the update button. You make the meeting change and you save it, and it works. It will send out the information to the appropriate service provider and update the meeting there.
Okay, next question. Can I send invitations to Microsoft Teams channels with DOMI? I'm not sure what channels are.
I don't know.
Interesting.
There's probably a REST API to talk to Teams channels, and that would be the approach to do it. I don't think Teams channels have an email address as such that you can send them to. The other option would be to copy and paste them across. I don't think in Outlook that you can send it to a channel. I think it creates a chat for that meeting.
Yeah. And the truth is, your answer is better than mine, because my answer is I don't have a clue.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time. Let's just do a couple more. Is there a way in the SameTime meeting room, instead of creating a new one, can you just pick a meeting from a room from an existing list of meeting rooms?
I think you need to add that as an online meeting in the same way that you have been able to since probably R9, as a fixed meeting there, and add it that way. This is the functionality that we added was for ad hoc meetings. The functionality already exists there for storing fixed room names.
Right.
So I think that would be the way to do it.
Right. And the SameTime meeting URL is generated based upon the subject line, as Rocky explained in his thing. So yeah, it's totally ad hoc. So it doesn't connect with meeting rooms.
Yeah. And we just add the meeting name there, so that if you go to the SameTime UI, which shows a list of meetings, then you've got some chance of working out which one it relates to. We found very soon that if we just use NAT unique, we've got no idea which meeting that's for. So we added something sensible in the name.
Okay. Can you connect to more than one SameTime environment? In other words, company one and maybe another one somewhere else?
Not with the current design. It's possible, but that would require extending the underlying code. You'd have to go in and make some changes to the script libraries, and you'd have to make some duplicate agents, and you would have to reference in them. You'd have to have SameTime _1 or SameTime _A, SameTime _B. You'd have to have a way to differentiate them within the code. It's possible, but it would take some work on your part.
Okay, and I think we're kind of running out of time, so we'll just do one more. Just to clarify, in 12.0.1, do you have to do the DOMI install process, or that will be built into the template?
No, it's done.
No, it's built into the template.
Built in, so you don't have to do anything. Okay, well, there are some more questions. We'll pass those on to the team and put those up on the webinars page once we get some responses to those. And I'd like to thank Devin and Rocky and Paul for presenting today, and as well as Jesse for your help in co-hosting. So Paul, do you have any closing remarks?
Just thanks for having us, and I hope you enjoy the code, and I hope it has a life beyond just the mail template.
All right, great. Yeah, looks like a really interesting project. Well, everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch everyone in our October webinar. Take care.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.